They say in the eastern wing of an old dormitory at Tokyo University, there lies a room no one should stay in twice. If you ever hear someone whisper your name from behind the closed door at the end of the hall, do not answer. That's what the janitor once said, in a voice that trembled like paper catching flame, when the last resident was taken away. His story was never printed in any newspaper, but pieces of it remain, scattered across student message boards, old forums, whispered rumors at the vending machines after midnight. Each version tells of a different girl, a different year, yet always the same room. Room 407. Tokyo University's East Dormitory was built in 1972, a block of concrete shaped like a half-buried tomb, its narrow corridors echoing with the sound of water dripping through old pipes. The place had been scheduled for demolition years ago, but due to funding reallocation, the building still stands, occupied by those who couldn't afford the newer dorms on the main campus. The hallway smells faintly of disinfectant and rust. At night, even the neon from the courtyard fails to reach the last door on the right. Some say the university knows that the administration quietly skips that room number on the application list each year. Yet sometimes, a mistake happens. In the autumn of 2019, when the rain refused to stop falling over Tokyo, a freshman named Aya Nishimori was assigned to that very room. Her name had been added late, a clerical adjustment after another student dropped out. Aya was from Fukuoka, quiet, diligent, the kind of girl who kept her notebooks neat and her umbrella folded tight. Her acceptance to Tokyo University was a dream her mother whispered prayers for every morning. When she arrived, the dormitory looked tired, almost grieving, but to her it was still a step toward the future. The matron handed her a single key with a faded tag, 407. She hesitated for a second before smiling. "There used to be 2 beds," the matron murmured, not meeting her eyes. "Now there's only 1. The other frame was removed." Aya nodded politely, thinking it was just part of the room's renovation. The hallway was unusually long, as if stretching further than the building's blueprint allowed. Doors on either side were shut tight, and behind each she heard faint sounds. Water boiling, murmurs, laughter muffled by walls. But at the end of the corridor, silence. Even her own footsteps seemed swallowed whole. Room 407 greeted her with a faint metallic smell. Inside, the air was colder, as though it belonged to another season. The light flickered when she turned it on, revealing a small desk, an empty shelf, and a single bed pushed against the window. Beside the bed was a desk with a thin notebook lying open. No name, no student ID. Just a blank cover, pale as bone. Aya picked it up. The first page was filled with neat handwriting in faded ink. She said she would come back after the rain. No date, no name, no explanation. The notebook felt strangely warm in her hands. She placed it aside, thinking it belonged to the previous tenant, and began unpacking her things. But that night, as she lay in bed listening to the rain tapping against the window, she thought she heard someone breathing softly beside her, a rhythm too slow, too patient to be her own. When she turned, nothing. Only the curtain swaying, though the window was closed. The next morning, she laughed it off, telling herself it was fatigue from the long trip. She even mentioned it casually to a girl she met in the dining hall, Kana, who stayed on the floor below. Kana froze for a moment when Aya said her room number. Then she smiled. The kind of smile people make when they don't want to scare you. "I thought that section was closed," Kana said quietly. "You actually sleep there?" Aya nodded. "Why?" Kana only shook her head. "Just, if you ever hear someone knocking late at night, don't open the door. It's probably just the pipes. They sound strange there." That evening, Aya returned to her room with a small carton of milk and a notebook for her classes. The unnamed notebook still sat on the desk, though she could not remember leaving it open. The words on the second page had changed. "She came back last night." Aya froze. Her reflection in the window seemed to darken slightly, as though another figure stood behind her. She flipped through the rest of the notebook, all blank. Only those two sentences. No handwriting on the back. The ink smelled faintly of rain. She tried to sleep with the light on that night, the notebook locked in her drawer. But around 2 a.m., she woke to a faint humming sound. A girl's voice humming an unfamiliar melody, low and trembling. It came from the far corner, from where the second bed used to be. Aya sat up slowly, her pulse trembling against her skin. The air had turned thick, almost liquid. Then came a whisper, soft, childlike. "Do you still write in your journal?" Aya's breath caught. The drawer was half open. The notebook lay on the floor, its pages fluttering like something alive. In the faint light, she saw words bleeding across the paper, letters forming one by one. "You forgot me." Her hands shook as she slammed the drawer shut, the notebook trapped inside. The humming stopped. The air returned to normal. But from that night onward, she began to feel less alone, not in the comforting way. Sometimes when she brushed her teeth, she'd see a second toothbrush resting on the sink, damp. Sometimes her pens were rearranged, and sometimes in the reflection of her window, she'd see a shadow of someone sitting on the empty bed, reading. When she told Kana, her friend's expression changed. "Don't touch that notebook again," Kana said firmly. "If it's the same one I think it is." It belonged to a girl named Mika Sato. She died in that room 10 years ago. Aya felt the air drain from her lungs. What happened to her? Kana looked around before whispering. They said she was brilliant, top of her class in literature, but during her final year, she vanished. The police thought she ran away, but her roommate insisted Mika was still in the room, writing, even after she disappeared. Aya stared at her hands. Ink stains she didn't remember were on her fingertips. That night when she returned to room 407, the notebook was already on her desk, open to a fresh page. New words waited for her. "Now that you've read this fair, you remember me, don't you?" Long before Aya Nishimori ever set foot in room 407, there was another girl whose name was once whispered with admiration through the quiet corridors of the university, Mika Sato. In 2009, Mika was the pride of the literature faculty, a student whose essays were rumored to make even professors pause. Her writing was lyrical, unsettling, and precise, as though she were transcribing something she did not entirely understand but could not resist. Those who knew her said she kept to herself, that her smile was polite but distant, and always she carried a small notebook bound in pale gray, never letting it leave her desk. It was during the spring of her final year that Mika began her thesis, an ambitious paper on linguistic resonance in forbidden texts of the Meiji era. Her advisor warned her about choosing such material. Some of those documents were banned, their authors executed or declared insane. Mika only smiled and said, "Words cannot harm if you understand them." But they did. The notebook was her private copy, her translation of fragments that had no existing version. She wrote from dusk until dawn, her candle burning down to stubs, the walls of room 407 turning black with smoke. Her roommate at the time, Emi Takahara, recalled that Mika would sometimes murmur as she wrote, her lips forming words that didn't belong to any language she knew. Then one night, Emi woke to find Mika's bed empty, the window wide open though the air outside was heavy with rain. On Mika's desk, The gray notebook lay open to a single phrase repeated endlessly across the page. If you write her name, she returns. Emmy swore she heard someone whispering from the hallway, a voice that sounded like her own name, calling softly, almost lovingly. She turned toward the sound and never spoke again. When the janitor found her the next morning, Emmy sat on the floor, eyes fixed on the notebook, her lips trembling but silent. Mika was gone. The university listed her as missing, and room 407 was sealed for the rest of that semester. The rumor was that any student who stayed there afterward began writing unconsciously, filling page after page with words they didn't remember composing. Years later, Aya was the next name to appear on that room's registry. The rain had not stopped since the night the words in the notebook changed. Aya stopped going to the cafeteria. She began skipping classes. Every time she tried to throw the notebook away, into the trash bin, the drainage pipe, even into the incinerator behind the dorm, it somehow reappeared on her desk before she returned, always open to the next page, always waiting. The handwriting was no longer faded but darker, more insistent, as though the ink had been drawn from her own veins. Do you remember the paper I never finished? Help me complete it. We can be perfect together. Aya tried to ignore it, but strange things began to happen around her. The lights would flicker in rhythm with her heartbeat. Her laptop would open to blank documents titled Untitled. Her professors began receiving essays written in her name. Beautiful, haunting essays she swore she never wrote. One of them, a visiting lecturer from Kyoto, asked to meet her privately. He was a man in his 50s, his spectacles fogged by the drizzle outside. I read your analysis of the Meiji text, he said, voice trembling. Remarkable. But tell me, where did you find the original manuscript? Aya blinked. What manuscript? He showed her a photocopy, a paragraph of archaic Japanese written in identical handwriting to the one in her notebook, words she had never seen before. That fragment, he said, lowering his voice, was believed lost. The student who last translated it disappeared. Aya felt her throat tighten. Mika Sato. The man looked startled. You know that name? When she shook her head, he leaned closer. Then you must stop. Whatever you're doing, stop. There's a theory that Mika's final work was not merely a translation, but an invocation, a linguistic curse that binds the writer to the written. They called it Kotodama no Noroi, the curse of the spirit word. Aya didn't sleep that night. Her fingers tingled as if ink pulsed beneath her skin. She decided to destroy the notebook once and for all. At 3 a.m., she carried it to the communal sink at the end of the hall. The building was silent except for the faint hum of electricity through the walls. She turned on the tap, letting the water soak through the pages. The ink bled, black lines spreading like veins. She thought she heard a sigh, soft, almost grateful. And for a moment, the air grew warmer. But as she turned to leave, a drop of water fell from the ceiling onto her wrist. It wasn't clear. It was dark, thick. When she looked up, she saw wet footprints forming slowly across the ceiling, upside down, leading toward her room. The next morning, Kana knocked on her door, worried. Aya hadn't come down for breakfast. She heard movement inside, the sound of a chair scraping, paper rustling. Kana called her name again. Silence. When the matron unlocked the door later that day, they found the room empty. On the desk, the unnamed notebook lay open. The last page was filled from edge to edge, written in two handwritings that seemed to overlap, one old, one new. Mika Sato, completed. The university recorded Aya's disappearance as another voluntary withdrawal. Room 407 was sealed again, though no official notice explained why. But late at night, when the wind moves through the old corridor, some residents say they can still hear two voices reading together. One calm, one trembling, reciting something that sounds like a thesis defense. And beneath it all, faintly, the sound of pages turning. They say a curse begins not with hatred, but with longing. A word spoken too many times, or perhaps written once too perfectly. 3 months after Aya Nishimori's disappearance, Junpei Arakawa, a freelance journalist known for his obsession with urban legends, arrived at Tokyo University. His articles usually dwelled on strange disappearances and forgotten places, the kind that never made the headlines but were whispered about in dorm rooms, on train rides, in quiet cafes. He had heard the rumor of the room that rewrites its occupant. At first, he dismissed it as another dormitory myth, but something about the phrase, "she came back after the rain," lingered with him. It was the same sentence a graduate student had mumbled during an interview about campus ghost stories before she suddenly fainted. He began to dig. The archives at the university's old library were humid and dust-heavy. Junpei unearthed fragments of files about Mikasato, class records, thesis drafts, correspondence with her advisor. Yet in all the paperwork, her final project was missing. Only a note remained. Confiscated for linguistic contamination. He frowned at the term. Contamination, like a disease. At 8 p.m., as the rain began to fall outside, he requested access to the East Dormitory, claiming to be photographing the old building before its scheduled renovation. The guard hesitated, then shrugged. He had seen too many journalists come and go. The corridor smelled of mold and something metallic. Junpei's recorder picked up a low humming sound, barely audible, like breath caught between walls. The air grew colder near the end of the hall. Room 407 was still sealed with a strip of university tape, yellowed and peeling. But the lock, someone had broken it. Inside, the room looked strangely alive. Dust floated like mist in the flashlight beam. A desk, a bed, a single notebook resting neatly at the center, its cover pale, edges damp as if it had recently been touched. Junpei put on gloves, lifted it carefully. No title, no name. The first page read, "You are not the first to read me." He froze. The ink shimmered faintly under the light, like it had been written only moments ago. He flipped to the next page. A line appeared as he stared, the handwriting forming slowly, letter by letter, as if the pen were invisible, but moving before his eyes. "If you write, you join." His breath fogged the page. He stepped back, heart pounding. The door behind him creaked. He turned the recorder on. "Tokyo University Dormitory, East Wing, Room 407, he whispered. "Subject, alleged cursed notebook. Activity observed. Ink forming autonomously. No visible instruments present." But then the tape captured something else. A faint second voice overlapping his, whispering the same words but slightly out of sync. He played it back. 2 voices. On his, 1 female. The flashlight flickered. In the reflection of the window, he saw a second figure. Hair long, soaked, face turned away, standing exactly where the other bed should have been. He dropped the recorder. It rolled under the desk, still recording. The notebook's pages fluttered wildly, though there was no wind. Words poured out like breath. "Finish what I began. They erased me. Let me speak again." Junpei stumbled backward, slamming into the wall. "Who are you?" he whispered. The reflection turned slightly, just enough for him to see her mouth, lips pale, trembling, whispering a name he had only read in the archives. Mika. The air around him seemed to fold, pulling sound inward until the silence screamed. When he blinked, the figure was gone. Only the notebook remained, opened to a page that now bore his own handwriting. But he hadn't written anything. It read, Junpei Arakawa, witness. He fled the dormitory that night, leaving the notebook behind. Yet even as he ran through the rain, the sound of turning pages followed him. Faint, rhythmic, like footsteps made of paper. For days, Junpei couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he dreamed of letters rearranging themselves, forming faces, mouths speaking through ink. He decided to publish an article to expose whatever ritual or madness had taken root in that building. The article never came out. His editor later found his manuscript half-finished, words trailing off mid-sentence. The last typed line read, "Language remembers what humans forget." Junpei vanished a week later. The police discovered his apartment door locked from the inside. On his desk was a notebook identical to the one in room 407, open to a fresh page. Written there in his handwriting was a single sentence. She asked me to help her finish her thesis. Below it, a signature that wasn't his. Mika Sato. For a while, silence returned to the East Dormitory. Students avoided the topic, the way one avoids speaking of a family member gone mad. The building aged quietly, its pipes breathing in the cold. But some of the professors began to whisper again about old linguistic theories, Kotodama, the spirit of words, that believed every utterance carried life. If a word is a vessel and the writer a priest, then repetition is prayer, and prayer can open doors. The Meiji-era scholars Mika studied were said to practice Gosho Jutsu, the art of summoning spirits through phonetic resonance, to write a name in a particular cadence, to chant its syllables through brush and ink, was to call its essence into form. Most of those who tried either went mad or disappeared. Mika Sato, it seemed, had succeeded. Years later, a rumor spread online, a file shared between literature students, a scanned image of a handwritten essay titled Resonance and the Return of Voice. The paper was unsigned, but the content matched Mika's missing thesis. The last paragraph read, "Words are mirrors. When the writer gazes long enough, the reflection begins to write back." Many who downloaded the file claimed their computers froze when they reached that line. Some swore they heard typing from somewhere behind them, even though no one else was in the room. The university denied any connection. The dormitory remained closed. Yet the janitor, the same old man who had once warned Aya, said that on rainy nights, lights still flicker in the east wing, even though the electricity has long been cut. Sometimes, he said, he hears voices reading softly, like students practicing before a presentation. He can never make out the words, only the sound of a pen scratching and the faint, steady whisper, "If you write her name, she returns." In the spring of 2024, the East Dormitory had already been forgotten by most. The new generation of students passed its shadowed walls on their way to class without ever looking up. The structure stood like a patient ghost at the edge of campus, fenced, locked, condemned. But in the basement of the literature faculty, where old manuscripts were stored for digitization, the curse found breath again. Her name was Nao Fujimura, a second-year student working part-time in the university's archival lab. She was small, quiet, the kind of girl who preferred scanning pages to speaking. Her job was simple: convert old handwritten theses into digital files for preservation. The room was always dim, the scanners humming like mechanical cicadas. One evening, while sorting through a stack of unregistered folders, she found a plain manila envelope with a faded label. Sato, M., 2009, uncatalogued. She frowned. The name felt familiar, though she couldn't recall why. The envelope contained a bundle of yellowed pages, covered in neat handwriting. The title, written in black ink, read, resonance and the return of voice. Now adjusted her glasses. The first line drew her in immediately. "If you read this aloud, you will give me shape." She laughed softly. "Creepy," she murmured, scanning the page anyway. The machine's light swept across the words, digitizing every curve, every blot of ink. The sentence flickered briefly on her screen, then duplicated itself, line after line, until the monitor was filled with the same phrase repeated over and over. The cursor froze. The scanner light turned red. Now tried to shut it off, but the power button didn't respond. Instead, a second document opened on its own, untitled, empty. Then slowly, letters appeared. "It's been 15 years. Did they forget me?" She stared at the screen, heart pounding. "Who's there?" she whispered, absurdly, to the monitor. The reply appeared instantly. "I am the unfinished sentence." Now's breath caught. A shiver crawled up her spine. She unplugged the computer, yet the screen remained on, faintly glowing as though powered by something unseen. The words shifted again. "If you write, I'll remember you." The cursor blinked, waiting. She hesitated, fingers trembling over the keyboard. Finally, she typed one word. "Why?" The response came. "Because I was erased. Because you found me." The screen flickered. The room's fluorescent lights dimmed until only the glow from the monitor remained, blue and cold. The pages beside the scanner rustled, though there was no wind, and then faintly, now smelled rain. The metallic scent of wet concrete, like the air before a storm. The next morning Now returned to the lab early, trying to convince herself it had been a dream. But the file was still open, and at the bottom of the page, new lines had appeared. Tokyo University, room 407. Return the words to where they began. Now looked up the location in the old dormitory records. The building was officially off limits, scheduled for demolition the following year. Yet for reasons unclear, room 407 was still listed as under evaluation. Something in her, curiosity, maybe empathy, compelled her to go. That night, carrying her laptop and the envelope, she slipped past the fence. The corridor was darker than she expected, its walls slick with dampness. The air smelled faintly of ink and mildew. Her phone's flashlight trembled as she walked, each step echoing too loud. Room 407 waited at the end, its door warped but unlocked. Inside, everything looked untouched, frozen in another era. The bed, the desk, the faint outline of tape where something had once been removed. The air pulsed softly, like the room was breathing. Now placed her laptop on the desk. The screen came alive on its own, without her touching it. The document from last need opened, lines forming rapidly. "You brought me home. Do you hear it?" Then, faintly, she did. A low hum, almost beneath hearing, rising from the walls. It wasn't a voice, not at first. More like vibration, syllables overlapping, 1,000 whispers layered into one. She pressed her palms against her ears, but the words still found her, bleeding straight into her mind. "Speak for me. Finish the thesis." The laptop screen blurred, images flickering, faces of women, all different, all fading into one another. Aya Nishimori, Mika Sato, and others she didn't recognize. Each mouth moved silently, yet their eyes burned with the same expression, pleading. The cursor blinked again, waiting. Now's fingers hovered over the keyboard. "What do you want?" she whispered. The words appeared as if echoing from her throat. "To be read." A thunderclap shook the building. Dust rained from the ceiling. The notebook, that same gray, bone-pale one, slid out from beneath the bed and fell open at her feet. On the first page, written in ink so dark it seemed alive, was the line she had scanned hours ago. If you read this aloud, you will give me shape. Something moved behind her, the sound of bare feet on the old wooden floor. Now turned slowly. A figure stood in the corner. Long hair, soaked, clothes the color of water stains. The face was blurred, shifting like an image struggling to load. But when it spoke, the voice came from both the figure and the laptop at once. "I am Mika Sato. You have my words." Now stumbled back, knocking over the chair. The figure stepped forward, not walking, but sliding, as if each movement was rewritten midair. "Do not fear," it whispered. "I am only language. I only want to exist." The lights flickered violently. Every sentence now had scanned began flashing on the monitor, rearranging into new shapes, paragraphs that pulsed like veins. The air thickened, heavy with the smell of ink. She tried to run, but the door would not open. On the screen, new words burned through the digital static. The writer cannot escape the written. Her laptop began to smoke. The pages in the envelope lifted, spinning through the air like white moths. One by one, they pressed themselves against the walls, merging into them, until the entire room was covered in writing. Now screamed, not from pain, but from the sound. The words were alive, chanting themselves. "If you write her name, she returns. If you read her name, she breathes." The figure stepped closer, its face now clear, soft, calm, eyes filled with quiet madness. Mika's voice, layered with countless others, whispered one last time, "Now, finish it." And now did. She typed until her fingers bled, until her breath matched the rhythm of the room, until her body and words became one seamless hymn of ink and pulse. When the janitor unlocked the building the next day, after reports of strange lights, room 407 was empty. On the desk sat a laptop, its screen black. But when he leaned closer, he saw faint letters glowing beneath the surface, like embers. They formed slowly, repeating a single phrase, "Sato M. completed." That night she dreamed again. But it was not a dream. No, not entirely. She was sitting at her desk, the yellow light flickering faintly from the old fluorescent tube above. And Yuki was on her bed, humming softly, her back turned. The melody was slow, circular, familiar. The same three notes again and again. Aya turned, whispering her name. "Yuki, that song, where did you learn it?" The girl did not answer. Her long hair fell forward, shrouding her face. Aya's heart began to throb painfully, a drum of fear against her ribs. She rose from her chair and stepped closer, each step sinking into something cold, soft, like soaked cloth beneath her bare feet. The air was heavy, like standing underwater. When she reached the bed, the humming stopped. The room was silent again. Aya reached out, trembling, her fingers brushing the edge of the blanket, and found it wet. The blanket was damp, as though soaked in cold rain. The smell of mildew and something else, something metallic, filled her nostrils. She lifted the fabric slowly, carefully, and beneath it, nothing. No one. The bed was empty. Her breath hitched. She stepped back. Her eyes darted around the room, searching until they caught the mirror opposite the bed. And there, reflected in its cracked surface, Yuki was sitting upright, still, silent. Her head tilted just enough for the light to catch her left eye. An unblinking, glossy darkness staring back through the mirror's fractured line. Aya turned sharply, but no one was there. Only her own reflection, trembling. The next second, the door creaked. Not open, not closed, just breathing. It was in that half-open slit that she heard the voice, faint, distant, calling her name, not from the hallway, from inside the walls. She stumbled backward, knocking over her chair. Her notebook fell open, the blank pages fluttering. For the first time, she noticed something faint, barely visible pencil marks beneath the top sheet, as though someone had written something, then erased it violently. She tilted the page toward the light. The marks were shallow, but she could make out the indentations. A single phrase, again and again, across every erased line. "I'm still here." Her hands began to shake. The fluorescent light flickered once more and went out. Darkness pressed against her eyes. Only the faint humming remained, coming not from outside but from directly behind her. She turned slowly, holding her breath, and Yuki stood there, her white nightgown soaked, hair clinging to her face, water dripping onto the wooden floor. Her mouth was moving, but no sound came. Then, without warning, Yuki raised her hand and pressed something into Aya's palm. It was the notebook, the nameless one, the one Aya had found weeks ago in the drawer. Yuki's mouth opened wider now, impossibly wide, her jaw trembling as she forced the air out. Finally, the whisper came, broken, hoarse, like breath scraping against stone. "Don't write my name," Aya screamed. The notebook fell to the floor, pages scattering like white feathers in the dark. The sound of rain roared against the window, though the night outside was still. And just as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. When Aya opened her eyes again, it was morning. Her roommate's bed was neatly made. No sign of water, no smell of mold. The mirror had been replaced, new, spotless. And on her desk, a fresh notebook lay open, its pages clean except for the first line written in neat, unfamiliar handwriting. "Welcome back, Aya." She never told anyone what happened that night, but the following week, her professors noticed she had stopped attending lectures. By the end of the semester, her parents were contacted. No one had seen her for days. When they entered the dorm room, they found her desk covered with notebooks, each labeled carefully on the spine. All identical, except for one, the last one. Its cover blank, its pages empty, except the final line on the last page. Yuki wanted to graduate too. To this day, the room remains locked. They say the key has been misplaced. But sometimes when the hall is quiet and the wind moves through the vents, students swear they hear a faint scratching behind that final door, as though someone inside is still writing, trying to remember their own name. The file was found in a forgotten drawer of the university's archive, sealed in a thin brown envelope marked with the words, "Dormitory D, Room 304. There was no signature, only the emblem of the University of Tokyo stamped in fading red ink. Inside, a single report, no official date, no conclusion. In October of 2007, a student named A.M., female 19, disappeared from the women's dormitory. Her belongings were found intact. A second name, Y.T., appeared on the resident registry of the same room, though university records show no student by that name enrolled since 1997. Room 304 had been unoccupied for a decade following the death of a female student due to apparent suicide. Cause: academic pressure and isolation. Attached was a grainy photograph, two girls standing in front of the dormitory gate, both smiling, but the light was wrong. The second girl's outline seemed faint, as if she had never been there. The investigator's note scribbled at the bottom read, "Neighbor claims they heard two voices laughing past midnight the week after AM vanished, but surveillance shows only one person entering or leaving the corridor. The other was never recorded." A second page, water-stained, the handwriting faint but legible. The notebook has been recovered. Most pages are blank, but when held under UV light, faint ink emerges. Hundreds of lines repeating one phrase, "I'm still here." The file ends abruptly. No closing statement, no signature. Yet someone, perhaps the archivist, added a final line at the bottom corner in small, shaky letters. The room remains sealed, but sometimes the cleaning staff find new notebooks under the door, each one blank, each one damp. And beneath that, one last sentence, barely visible, almost erased. Do not assign room 304 again. If you listen closely, they say you can still hear the sound of pages turning when you pass that corridor on rainy nights. Some claim it's the draft, others the pipes. But if you stop and call the name Yuki, sometimes the wind will whisper it back.